So today's presentation is on the Airgap paradox, adversarial tactics and defensible designs. Hopefully everybody here already knows what an Airgap is, but if you don't, you're going to learn, and you're going to be able to think about it from an attacker point of view and a defender point of view. So that's me. I am a senior cloud security engineer. I have had 10 plus years working at various cloud service providers, including a couple that you probably have heard of. Prior to that, I have also worked in a site reliability engineer adjacent fields. If you've ever used the product GuardDuty, I've worked on that. Additionally, I've written and pushed patches to every Zen hypervisor in the world. So a lot of fun stuff, education, master's, bachelor's, which is irrelevant, OSCP, certs. If your organization wants to pay for you to take a test, go ahead and do it. And I've got a passion for history. My relevant bachelor's degree is in history, and I like sneakers. I've got about 50 pairs before I was forced to sell a bunch because it's expensive to ship them. So why am I giving this talk? I am giving this talk to legitimize my history degree and to challenge the assumption that disconnected means secure. That just because somebody says, hey, it's air-gapped, it's not connected to anything else, that is the end of the line. Where my thesis for this presentation is simply saying that's a larger part of a defense in-depth strategy. Just because it's disconnected does not mean secure. Also, what air gaps protect, what they don't, and that time is the only thing air gaps buy. The people who are interested in compromising an air gap network are very well funded, and they will not give up. So, the air gap, what is it? Ideally, and this changes organization by organization, it's a total disconnection from the internet to external networks. It is a network that has never touched the internet or no longer touches the internet. Different organizations have different definitions of this. Some of them will say, oh, this network is air-gapped from this network. Where realistically, you could just do that in a AWS account and just put things in different VPCs. Segmented, but not necessarily air-gapped, in my definition. In practice, even if something is entirely disconnected from the internet, there are still pathways that can exist between completely segmented and the internet itself. USBs, patches, vendor laptops, there's ways to what we call jump the air gap. So the goal in creating an air gap is to reduce your attack surface, not eliminate it, because unless you're extremely well funded, chances are you're going to have to connect your network to the internet at some point, or to an external network. So we talked a little bit about air gaps. Now let's talk about who uses air gaps. Critical infrastructure, ICS, SREday. There was an attack on a Ukrainian power grid around 2016, 2014. Up to the prelude of the current Ukrainian-Russian conflict, there was an event that shut down power for about 250,000 people in Ukraine. Likely somebody jumping the air gap to do. So critical infrastructure, so SREday, these systems that are built for uptime, not for security. When they were designed, likely never even designed with internet protocol in mind. Second, financial institutions, crypto. So if you buy Bitcoin or ETH or anything like that, you have a ledger wallet, might be an example of an air gap system. Also transaction cores at other financial institutions, also air gap. Research labs, keep your intellectual property to yourself. You don't want to share it with other people. And military. Military and government are big users of air gap systems because secret, top secret, you don't want to put your top secret stuff on the internet unless you're trying to win a war thunder argument. I think last time that happened was last week, so we're good for a little bit. So notable events of times that the air gap has been jumped, or the air gap has been hot. Agent BTZ 2008. This was around the time of the US occupation of the Middle East, which is still ongoing. Around this time, somebody in the Middle East plugged in a laptop, or plugged a USB into a laptop. USB had malware on it. Malware spread far into a network called SREday. SREday, if you don't know, is the US secret network that is air-gapped. Massive undertaking by the United States government to remove this worm. It took about a year. Can't remember what the program was called. Send speaker notes. I can send them to you later. Very expensive. They completely banned USBs for about a year. Next, and perhaps the most famous, is Stuxnet. Stuxnet is, in my opinion, the most famous piece of malware to ever exist. and potentially the first piece of malware that got kinetic on a target. Kinetic means causing physical damage. So what it did is it jumped the air gap via USB. You notice a trend in how you jump the air gap. Jump the air gap via USB into an Iranian nuclear enrichment site. And what it did, using 4 zero-day exploits and 2 stolen digital certificates, was able to damage the centrifuges that enriched uranium, and while doing so, showed all green to the operators operating it. So they never knew that it was hacked. It looked good until suddenly it wasn't. It is also for a while at least, it used to be the only piece of malware with its own documentary. And most recently, Project Sauron. Project Sauron, possible attribution with it, but I'm not going to talk about that here. It was specifically designed for air gaps, very modular. Every instance of Project Sauron is completely unique from the other. We've talked about the air gap and how it has been attacked in the past. So let's talk about it from a thought exercise point of view. How do adversaries attempt to attack the air gap? It's still going to be the same sort of attacker mindset, recon, exploitation, weaponize. It's all going to be the same cycle as everything else, but possibly even easier because your attack surface is already going to be more limited because you already need to focus on your data transfer points. That's what you need to focus on. So you exploit data transfer points, USBs, patch media, covert channels. There's a really cool engineer out of Israel named Mordecai Guri. You may be familiar with his work because he has demonstrated a lot of really cool techniques of exfiltrating from air-gapped networks, including reading blinking USB lights, or modulating fan speeds, or radio frequencies that you never knew your computer had. Really cool. Definitely recommend checking him out on YouTube. He's got his presentations a lot more exciting than mine. Additionally, insiders. Insider threat does not mean a willing insider. You can just as easily be an unwilling insider, either through coercion or ignorance. Pick a USB up off the ground in a parking lot, plug it in. You're an insider by accident. You're an insider. So after you find your way to jump the air gap, you deliver malicious payloads through the transfer mechanism. We just talked about that. And then you exfiltrate, or you execute the operation. So malware usually only has one of two goals, right? It's either disrupt or it is to exfiltrate. And exfiltrating from an air gap is a lot more difficult than disrupting is, because you need to make that connection twice. I'm not saying it's impossible, just that it's a lot simpler to destroy than it is to sneak stuff out. So we've talked about attacking the air gap. Now let's talk about how to actually secure the air gap. First, I argue that an air gap can really only serve one of two purposes: data isolation or data integrity. Organizations may say that they're doing both of them, but in reality, you're probably only doing one of them. And if you're not going into this at the beginning with the attitude of, I want pure isolation or pure data integrity, then you may be having you may have issues that you did not intend down the line. So are you thinking of preventing a remote compromise, which would be isolation, which means no data in and no data out? Or do we want to make sure that nobody ever gets to see the data that we are focusing on, or making sure there's not a Snowden or Reality Winner style event where data is allowed to exfiltrate our systems, which means that our data has to be more controlled? So if you can't decide on which one you want to do, you can think about it. These are some questions that you can think about. Does my air gap allow for software updates via USB, patch DVDs, software updates in any capacity that did not involve you writing it yourself within the air gap? 2, do you transfer logs and reports out of it? Or do you allow vendors to come in, bring their own laptops, firmware? Maybe there's regulatory requirements on why somebody might need to do that. And just broader, is there any data ever allowed into or out of the system? And I think that if you answer yes to any of these, you're building for data integrity and not data isolation as an air gap. So, not to say that it's not impossible to build an isolated air gap. It's expensive. And unless you work for your local APT, you're probably not going to get the funding to build it. How would you build it? SREday cage, burn down everything, don't trust anybody ever. write your own operating system. Never do, basically as a security person, it's my best dream. It's my dream of never allowing anybody to touch anything ever, because then it would finally be secure. But no forfeit, that doesn't make money, people are unhappy. So maybe we're on the page now where you think, maybe I don't really want an isolated air gap because that's expensive and my company needs to make money. So let's think about building a data integrity air gap. So you acknowledge that data will probably need to come into and out of your environment. How do you do this? And I think that there's two pillars on how you do this. First, you have somebody called a data transfer officer, or DTO. This is the person that owns all data into and out of your network. They are not a policy check in the box. They are somebody that has legitimate delegated authority to say no. And number two is to apply shift left principles when designing the air gap. At a lot of companies, especially at startups, right, you bias for action. You want to get going, you want to build fast. You don't have time to build with security in mind, as hurtful as that is to me. An air gap is not something that you should be building without security in mind, because its entire purpose is security. So your data transfer officer. This is your individual that is responsible for all data into and out of your air gap. They are responsible for scanning, sanitization, and approval. They have entire authority to say no. There is no escalating above them. There is, because the person above them is probably the CEO. It's probably your top of the company that this responsibility has been delegated to, or that this authority has been delegated to them to say no. They are, at the end of the day, the person responsible for all security within the air gap regarding information that comes into and out of. And if they tell you no, think of them as like a bouncer at a nightclub. They say no, go back to the line. Go back to the line, try again in a couple hours, try again tomorrow. Change your clothes, do whatever. That USB looks bad. Second, and I know this is like a DevSecOps style attitude of a shift left culture, but it definitely applies here. Of you build your air gap because you want things to happen in it. You need usability. You need to bring new features into it. You need people to be happy to, not happy. You need to be have people that are willing to use it and able to use it. So treat the strategy, or define the strategy at the very beginning. Treat every artifact, and the way how you do this is to treat every artifact as high risk. This helps the DTO, gets your stuff pushed in, and make sure that, you know, everything that's coming in is signed. You've got an SBOM, you've got signatures, you've got metadata, that everything that you're pushing into your air gap is expected, signed for, good to go. Next, and I've actually seen this one quite a lot with developers, building for offline success. Software engineers like to write things built on my machine, or maybe even containers don't work as well in an air gap as they might outside of an air gap. So making sure that you turn off your Wi-Fi switch or your Bluetooth card or whatever, and that you can actually go ahead and that your software actually works. Staging before deployment. Make sure that there is a air gap-like development zone that can be used to make sure that everything is good to go, that you're verifying that all the stuff is there. Next, and this is probably the biggest one, sanitize everything every time. We talked about the previous bits of malware in the past. What was the common entry point? USBs. Don't plug in one, plug it back into the one on the low side, plug it back into high side. You're going to get popped. And then last, automate logs, push them to your SIM if you have the budget for it. Even air gaps need socks, as surprising as that might sound. And yeah, that's about it. Air gap does not mean invulnerable. Air gap is just part of a larger defense in depth strategy. It can be, it has been popped in the past. It can be popped again. You're building for integrity or isolation, never both. You can strive for both, but you might be falling through on one crack and not through the others. And chances are you're probably building for data integrity. Your DTO is not a policy checkpoint. And if it's not secured before it enters the air gap, it's too late. And clear purpose beats false confidence every time. Just saying my network is isolated is not good enough. It needs to be isolated and secured technically, not just through policy. Air gaps don't buy you security, they buy you time, and the people that are willing to target air gaps are probably people that have a lot of time and a lot of resources. So it's just trying to burn them out until they go to somewhere more interesting.